Hey Spuddies, Potato McWhiskey here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about Anno 117 Pax Romana because I recently traveled to Rome in order to play the game in person. For full disclosure, I want to make it clear that this video is sponsored by Ubisoft and that my trip and my accommodation in Rome was paid for by Ubisoft. You should be aware of this because this could have influenced my opinion of the game. That said, I typically only accept sponsorships for products that I'm interested in already, and having a reasonable amount of faith that it will be a good product. In this instance, I was unable to play Anno until I got to Rome, but let me tell you, the developers have not disappointed me because I believe them when they say that this is the most ambitious Anno game that has ever been developed. Let me walk you through my experience the first time I played Anno 117 Pax Romana. I started out looking for a place to put my villa. I did find a pretty sick location on an island, but I decided to place it near some ruins instead because they had the right vibes. And true to classic Anno gameplay, the first thing that I built was a woodcutter, which needs trees nearby in order to produce at maximum efficiency. And I connected it to my trading post on the coast with one of those fancy new diagonal roads. I quickly realized though that the woodcutter was too far from the trading post to deliver wood, and so I was trying to place a warehouse as far as possible from the woodcutter, but I couldn't figure out what the delivery range was until the developer standing behind me suggested that I click on the woodcutter, after which things became a lot more clear to me. Can you tell it's been a while since I've played an Anno game? Once I had the warehouse placed, I played around with the building placement tools to try and get a better feel for them. And then I zipped over to my villa in order to connect it up to my road network with a very long diagonal road. There's something really satisfying about the diagonal roads that I can't really explain. It just feels nice. Time for a sawmill so that I would actually be able to build my tier 1 buildings. So I plonked it right down beside my warehouse, but still in range of the woodcutter, hoping to simplify my delivery chains and take some pressure off the warehouse in the long term. Then I dove right into city building, placing my first few houses down, the Libertas resident, which acts as the basic dwelling in Anno 117. Shortly afterwards, I unlocked a pair of new foods for my population: sardines and porridge. Naturally, I set about adding these new resources to my city supply network, with 2 fisher huts near my trading post, hopefully producing enough sardines for my population. Of course, I'm a benevolent leader and I wanted my people to have a diverse diet. So I started building my first oat farm, and you can see that I also started experimenting with enclosing the farm fields with the new diagonal roads. I didn't really execute it very well, but I think it shows the potential of the new system for people who like designing cities. Now, of course, people don't like to eat oats raw unless they're a horse in disguise. So I got myself a porridge kitchen to complete the porridge production chain. Quite quickly, I found myself with a pair of new buildings unlocked: the market and the tavern. I set about placing a market alongside a bunch of new dwellings, hoping to expand my population and ultimately my tax base. I do find the city construction in Anno to be quite satisfying. Of course, is it really worth living life without a tavern to go get drunk in? So I built my people one of those as well. This unlocked a pair of new fashions for my population: the humble tunic and the drip-laden pileus. After all, what's the point of being well-fed and drunk if you're not dripped out in the latest Libertas fashion? I got to work placing down a hemp farm, which would supply me with the materials for tunics. And I really like the diagonal edges of the fields with the new building placement system. It is extremely satisfying and I cannot explain why. Hemp is no good on its own, so I grabbed myself a spinner to turn that hemp into those tunics. Then I set about making a nice new sheepfold to get access to wool, which triggered a couple of tutorial events that explained what I think is a new mechanic in Anno, which is that production buildings now have an area effect radius that boost nearby buildings. The reason I feel uncertain that this is a new gameplay mechanic is because it fits so naturally into the gameplay of Anno that it doesn't feel like a new gameplay mechanic. It just feels so well integrated. I kind of love it. I also got a pop-up about city attributes, which explained the various effects of different attributes of buildings that they can have an effect on your city in Anno 117. Population gives you more workforce, fire safety lowers the risk of fire disasters, income gives you money over time, knowledge lets you research technology. I forget what prestige does, but I think it has something to do with your island level and your villa upgrades. I think belief lets you upgrade the bonuses from your dedicated god on a per island basis. Health lowers the risk of plagues, and happiness does something. I think it prevents revolts. There was a lot to take in all at once, so I don't remember all of the details perfectly. Anyway, I continued building up my town, upgrading some of my dwellings to Tier 2, which is the new plebeian tier of housing. This unlocked some new foods for my population. Bread, which seems pretty standard, and garum, which, if you've ever heard what it's actually made of, basically sounds like a made-up food horror story to scare children into eating their Worcester sauce. Naturally, in Anno, when a new production chain is unlocked, you set about building that new production chain. So I made a nice little wheat farm to kick off my bread production. Then I placed a watermill on a river slot, because they need river slots. But in order to construct them, they also need clay tiles, which I hadn't started producing yet. Not to worry, thankfully Anno 117 lets you place down blueprints even if you don't have the resources for construction. The same was true for the bakery, although the bakery had an interesting interaction. It had both a positive effect on income of nearby buildings and a negative effect on the fire safety of nearby buildings. I'm not the kind of guy who will pass up on money in a video game, so I slapped that death trap down right on the edge of my town, and then I realized I also needed to build a charcoal kiln to fuel my bakery, so I grabbed one of those too. I needed tiles to build some of these higher tier buildings, so I found a nice spot on the river to drop a clay quarry, a tiler kiln, and a warehouse. A couple minutes later at maximum speed, my helpful advisor let me know it was time to upgrade those blueprints I'd laid down earlier, and so I finalized my wheat farm and made a mental note to upgrade the other blueprints once I had the tiles in storage. Now, with the advent of bakeries and charcoal kilns, I was a little bit concerned about the fire safety of my city. I mean, at this point I'd basically built a giant bonfire filled with taxpayers, dripped out in the latest Libertas fashion, fueled by porridge and sardines, so a vigilance helped me offset that fire safety penalty that my city was currently dealing with. I figured if my vigilance wasn't going to keep me safe from the cleansing flame, maybe faith could. So I built a sanctuary, which is the game's first religion building, I believe, and it generates happiness and belief. This allows me to pick a patron god for this island. I decided to go with Ceres because I don't really know what the effect of picking a deity is, and I figure the extra population and farming sounds awesome, even if, again, I don't really know what the actual effects are. Now, when I built that temple, I also built the Grammaticus, which generates knowledge. This triggered the game to open the technology screen after I picked a deity. I was feeling slightly overwhelmed by all the new stuff, so I just did what the game told me and I queued up research for trading post improvements. It was around this time that I realized that letting the game run on maximum speed while running a pretty hefty budget deficit had left me basically on the brink of bankruptcy. So I started massively expanding the number of houses I had in my city in the hope of increasing my tax base to get back into the black. A couple minutes later, my technology research finished, and this time I took the time to have a look around. My first impression is that I quite like the new technology tree. I feel like it adds a decent amount to the gameplay. I picked warehouse expansion because, again, I didn't really know what I was doing, and at this point I was just picking at random. Immediately after this, I began trying to produce garum on my island, and this was a bit of a comedy of errors because I didn't realize that this island that my home city is on doesn't have the fertility for mackerel. I don't know how long and how many scrambler huts I built before the developer behind me patiently explained how fertility works, and then I was like, duh, it's an Anno game, you gotta have multiple islands. But it was a long time before I asked the question, why am I not getting any mackerel? I mass upgraded some of my houses to the plebeian tier and unlocked some new fashion for my people, sandals and soap. I'm not entirely sure how soap works as a fashion item. Do you tie it to your belt to show off your wealth, or is it sort of a cleaner you are, the more fashionable you are type situation? These are the questions that haunt me at night. Regardless, the smell of my city was beginning to become unbearable, so I decided to make it worse by building a pigsty and a tannery before I even tried to produce soap. At the very least, my people would have awesome sandals, even if they had cartoon stink lines drifting off them. Again, I really love the aspect of putting your production buildings inside of the city for an extra boost. It just feels like this is how it has always been in Anno. Warehouse organization technology finished, and I decided to grab clever carpentry to boost my wood production. I've been in a major deficit of wood since I started hanging out with your mother. Around this time I started exploring with my ship, and I found my first other player. I didn't really interact with them because I think I was looking for an island with mackerel fertility. In the meantime, my city was still expanding, and I realized I needed another tavern, so I cleared a few houses, plonked down a shiny new drinking establishment. If only infrastructure development was this easy in the real world. Hashtag housing crisis. A technology finished pop-up prompted me to go explore the other technology trees. Up until this point I'd spent most of my knowledge advancing economic technologies, but I was quickly running out of options. I queued up market forces to improve the effect range of my markets, villa visitation for more prestige, and watchtowers to unlock a new happiness building. My city was big enough to start thinking about shipbuilding, so I grabbed myself a shipyard. I got myself a hemp farm and a rope maker so that I could supply the shipyard with rope. And then I grabbed a sheep farm and a sail maker to supply it with sails. All the basic fundamentals that you're going to need in Anno 117 to get a shipbuilding industry going. Which you're gonna need if you're gonna expand to other islands, unless you want to spend thousands of cash to buy other people's ships. Then finally, I had the money and I had a ship in position to claim an island that had mackerel fertility. I placed down a new villa and a basic woodcutting industry, and I gleefully tried to place a scomber's hut before realizing that the devastating reality was I needed to have brought tiles to this island in order to make the scomber's hut because it was a tier 2 production building. A classic Anno rookie mistake. So I set my boat to go and do a quest, I queued up a little bit more technology, and then I finished out that quest by chasing down the event spawned enemy ship before picking up the dropped cargo in order to deliver it to the quest giver. I don't really feel comfortable explaining just how long I spent at the quest giver's dock trying to figure out how to hand in the quest item, nor how many times I accidentally ejected the quest item into the water when I was trying to hand it in. This was one of those times where a developer had to step in and tell me what to do. And of course, it worked instantly, despite my protests and me being adamant that I had tried to just hand it in that way already. A classic. Also another classic newbie move by me. Rather than bringing exactly as many tiles that I needed to make a scomber's hut on my island, I loaded up my entire boat with tiles in what hindsight tells me was a rage-induced construction frenzy. You need tiles? Oh, I'll get you tiles. Type energy. It was about now that I actually unlocked the sort of next branch of each research tier, which gave me a host of new options to spend my knowledge on. I queued up Villa Retinue for the free workforce that would make settling new islands a lot easier, and Hurried Horea, which would improve the loading speed of carts at all warehouses. I definitely am a big fan of the economic technology tree. My tile-laden boat made its voyage to my new island, Pelagia, and I tried to deposit my tiles, but the trading post could only hold 75. So I used the tiles to upgrade the trading post and stuffed the rest of the tiles into it unceremoniously. At long last, my quest to get the scomber's hut in order to make garum was finally coming to a close. The only thing left to do now that we were making mackerel was to set up a trade route to my home island. Since my only ship was now busy on a trade route, I circled back to the shipyard in order to explore the new shipbuilding system. Basically, you've got a ship hull with a certain number of cargo holds, and then modules that you can slot into cargo holds. These modules make it so the ship can't carry as much, but it improves its performance or gives it new abilities. The ship archers allows the ship to shoot at the cost of extra wood, weapons, and maintenance, while the ship rows increase maneuverability and give you independence from the wind at the cost of extra wood and maintenance. I really like this customization system. Every decision you make takes something valuable away, namely those very important cargo holds. It's simple, elegant, and meaningful. Since military ships were on the cards for me, I decided to create an iron mine to get iron ore, a furnace to smelt that iron ore into iron using charcoal, and then a weaponsmith to turn that iron into weapons using charcoal. Production chain achieved. I also got a really nice shot of my city at night, and I find the day-night cycle to be quite pleasing. And it produces some very visually appealing results if you just let your camera sit still and take in the environment. I built a barracks because I was curious about land military unit recruitment. They seem fairly expensive both in terms of the upfront costs as well as the ongoing maintenance costs, but I never really got to play around with them. I took some more sick B-roll footage of my city at night from a few different angles. I was really trying to get some super cool B-roll, but I think the time pressure of the event and not being super familiar with the game meant I couldn't quite get things to look or the camera to move the way that I wanted them to. Regardless, I do think the game has great potential for these sort of flyby B-roll shots. I needed some resin to make pots. They're not called pots in the game, I think, but I'm not really sure how to pronounce the word that it was, so I'm just going to call them pots. Another quick trade route: my capital island is being wonderfully supplied with the all-new resin resource. I claimed another massively expensive island and placed a villa on it, before taking a break to play around with some of the decoration tools in a relatively small corner of my city. I believe this game has huge potential for people who like to decorate. I needed olives for olive oil, which is why I claimed that new island previously. I grabbed a few olive farms, set myself up a trade route, and sat back to grab more B-roll. I was quite satisfied with the gameplay at this point, and I was having a ton of fun. Although the same can't be said for my population, because a nasty plague took out a couple of my buildings. I rushed to supply medical assistance before heading over to my city and upgrading my houses to Tier 3, also known as the Equis residences. With Tier 3 houses came Tier 3 construction materials like concrete, as well as Tier 3 foods, which were wine and cheese. Although cheese can only be produced on the Albion map, and I'm currently playing on the Latium map. Yep, Anno 117 has multiple types of maps, with multiple types of gameplay available. So wine is my only real choice. It requires honey from an apiary, which takes concrete to build, and it also takes grapes from a vineyard, which needs concrete as well. Thankfully, my home island has fertility for grapes, so this time I don't have to go scouting for new islands to claim. Concrete production requires sand and limestone. Sand you can get from the coastally placed sand refinery, which needs a little boardwalk to connect it to the logistics network. Limestone quarries are slightly more straightforward. You just pop them into a mining location to get limestone. Combine the two ingredients in a concrete mixer, and baby, you got a stew going. Shortly after I got my concrete production going, I got some new public buildings: the theatre and the aqueduct cistern. I'm a little rusty at Anno and a bit out of my depth at this point, but I eventually figure out that the aqueduct sources have to be placed on mining locations. Honestly, building aqueducts is a core part of any Roman game fantasy for me, and I think Anno delivers here. The aqueduct is awesome. I love it. Super big fan of making aqueducts, even if there was a bit of a learning curve. It took me a while, but I eventually got the blueprints down for a functional aqueduct source, and honestly, they feel kind of like railroads in Anno 1800. I think aqueducts are going to be something that you want to keep in mind really early into the layout and design of your residential districts, which is something I completely failed to do in this playthrough. Somehow I triggered the end of the Anno demo, but I opted to continue playing. I only had a few more minutes before I'd be whisked away from my computer to go eat some kind of meal in a Knights Templar building. I hurriedly recruited some military units, both land and naval, and demolished a significant portion of my city in order to try and build a theatre. Theatres are huge and they have a huge radius of effect. I had to delete a lot of stuff to get it down, but the rewards felt worth it, as it gives me a massive boost to knowledge, happiness, and prestige. Right before my access to the game was revoked, I managed to finish the blueprints to an aqueduct cistern to provide some of my people with fresh, clean water. I named my save file something humorous, knowing that the next day games journalist would be playing on this computer, and then I signed off the game. And that was my first experience with Anno 117. When I first heard about Anno 117, Pax Romanus, I was initially skeptical about some of the design decisions that the developers had made. I had heard the phrase, "no longer limited by the grid," and I feared that my beautiful grid-based city builder was about to experience a revolutionary change that I personally didn't want. In this house, we respect the grid. So, it was much to my delight to learn that they had added the option to build diagonally to the normal grid. And I want to stress that this is optional, but my oh my is it wonderful for adding just a little bit of visual flavour and beauty to your cities, as well as making use of every nook and cranny on your island. The diagonal construction seems on the surface like a very small thing, but it really adds an extra dimension to the feel of the gameplay and aesthetic of your city development. No pun intended. Anno is one of those genre-defining games in the city builder space, and after getting my hand on it, it's difficult to disagree with the developers' claim that this is the most ambitious installment of the series to date. Many of the new or returning gameplay features, like diagonal grid building, land armies, technology, and religion, feel like fairly radical departures from previous Anno games. However, the developers, Ubisoft Minds, have used a very conservative and careful hand in implementing these features. I never felt like any of the new features were a distraction from the mainline city building gameplay, and they felt thematically appropriate for a Roman-themed Anno game. Genuinely, I'm quite surprised at just how well executed it feels during gameplay, although I will give the caveat that I only got to play the game for 3 hours. That said, I feel like they delivered on the Roman fantasy for an Anno game, and the game genuinely looks gorgeous. Something interesting about the game is that you're playing an actual character in the game's world, and as you play through the campaign, you'll have the choice to play as one of 2 characters, which should change your story. The game is fully voice acted as far as I'm aware, which is something that I personally appreciate, as I prefer to listen to characters talk to me while I play a game, rather than be taken out of the gameplay to read a dialogue menu. Another really interesting aspect of the game is that they've added really significant gameplay choices, especially with regard to the religion and technology system. We didn't get a whole lot of details on that as of yet, because they're saving that for a future announcement. But basically, you'll be able to choose between being loyal to Roman ideals or taking a more syncretic approach to when you're playing on the Albion map, where you'll mix in different technologies, gods, and unique events that will shape your city, meaning that it should be quite different from each individual city and on subsequent playthroughs. Because I think when a game has many different playstyles, even if they're all not perfectly viable or equally in the meta, it is quite fun to mix it up from time to time. But that's it for me. I want to thank you guys very much for watching. I love you all very much, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye!